These little baskets have become a staple item at the Dollar Tree. And what I'm going to do is turn these into beautiful little pumpkins. Before I even bring these baskets home with me from the Dollar Tree, I check them out at the store to match up a few of the baskets to make sure that they fit well together. Because depending on where they're at in the stack of the baskets, some are a tiny bit wider and a tiny bit more narrow. You just don't know. So while you're there, just try to find two that match up. Now, once you find that perfect pair of baskets and you bring them home, we're going to go ahead and just grab our hot glue gun. And all we're going to do is just add a bead of hot glue around the edge of one of the baskets. All you have to do is sandwich these two together and let them dry for a few minutes. Now, once that has completely dried, what I'm going to do here is I don't want to see that seam between the two baskets. So I'm adding a little bit of hot glue, about 3 or 4 inches at a time. I'm just going to place a piece of ribbon over the top of that hot glue, and we'll continue doing that until we've done the whole perimeter of our pumpkin. Now all you need to do is trim the excess ribbon off and glue that little piece down, and you have the base of your pumpkin. Now for our stem on our pumpkin, I'm using these little birch pieces that I found at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to attach it with Fix All from Super Glue and a little bit of hot glue. And now once our stem is attached, we can add our embellishment. For this one, I'm just going to add a simple little bow with some hot glue to the top. And if you're not into bows, you could add some leaves, you could add some Spanish moss, maybe just tie a little piece of fabric on there. You could do whatever you'd like to embellish these. Now here is what our first pumpkin looks like. And with such a cute, fun, simple project, I couldn't just make one, so I did make 2 additional ones to have a fun set of 3. For the second pumpkin here, I used the darker baskets for this and a little bit different ribbons. And for the third pumpkin, I went more with a black and white themed, and I'm using some black and white ribbon around the border of this pumpkin. And then for the top, we're going to do a little raffia bow and a sheer black ribbon just to give it a different look. So I would love to hear from you guys. Let's vote. Which one do we like better? Number 1, number 2, or number 3? Which pumpkin? Please leave a comment below on what your favorite pumpkin is. For this craft, we're starting out with a tin can that was left over from some cookies. And I didn't want to throw this away because it still was in good shape. So let's go ahead and transform this into something new. Our first step is starting with some Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and I'm just going to paint the lower part of this tin can. I am going to leave the top rim without any paint because I want the lid to be able to slide off and on the can easily. Next, I take this lid and I just taped it down to a paintable surface, and using some black satin paint, I am going to go ahead and just paint the lid with that paint. And once that paint has completely dried, I did grab my sugar metallic paint, and I'm just going to go ahead and lightly tap that around the top of this tin can because I want to give it more of a metal look. And to add a little bit of rust to this can, I am going to use my sugar metallic paint in bronze, and I'm going to do the exact same technique, just a little bit lighter with that sponge brush. And once I was done with the first 3 layers, I did go back with my sponge and I just did a little bit more dry brushing with the black and the silver to blend everything in till I liked the color that it turned. Now, one thing I did really like with these sugar metallic paints, if you haven't used them before, they have like a grit to them. So it really gives that feel of like a rusted metal. So I thought that that was really cool, and that's why I really like these sugar metallic paints for this type of thing. And if you're interested in these paints, I will leave a link in my description box below. Now, I found this amazing napkin on Amazon, and I absolutely fell in love with it, and I kept debating whether or not I should buy them, and I just couldn't not buy them. They were so cute. So we're going to start out by just removing the back 2 layers on this napkin. And once we have those 2 layers removed, I am going to cut this napkin in half, and I'm going to save the other half for a future video. Now I'm going to grab some cling wrap, and I'm just going to place the cling wrap over the top of our napkin, leaving a little bit of extra cling wrap on either side. And then I'll just flip this whole thing over so that it's all ready to go, because we're going to take this cling wrap and we're going to use it to help guide our napkin onto our tin can. Let's grab our tin can, and I'm going to find the seam of the tin can, and that's where I'm going to start painting on my Mod Podge. And I'm using the matte finish on the Mod Podge for this, but you can use whichever one you prefer. And I'm just going to lightly do a coat of Mod Podge about 4 inches wide on the white painted area of the can. Now for this next step, I am going to be working in sections. So by only doing those 4 inches, I'm going to then lay the napkin over the top of the can in the area that we've painted the Mod Podge. And I'll just try to line up my seam with the napkin on the side there, and then we're just going to smooth that out using the cling wrap, so that way we don't tear the napkin, but it also takes out all of those wrinkles. And once we're satisfied with that section, we're just going to keep repeating the step all the way around the whole entire can, using a little bit of Mod Podge, about a 4-inch strip, and then we'll go ahead and smooth out the napkin and then continue on until the next spot. For our final quadrant, you can see that I slightly teared my napkin on the last quadrant, but that is okay, because when we smooth this out over the Mod Podge, we will not even see that little tear. And I'm just going to flip that over, and this napkin fits almost perfectly around this little tin. It has about a 1/4 of an inch overlap, which I'm totally fine with, and that overlap happens on the seam where we started out. And what I did do is I grabbed a little bit of Mod Podge on my brush, and I just painted down the seam while everything was still wet to make sure that everything stayed in place. And once this was completely dry, I went ahead and I did another coat of Mod Podge over the top to seal everything in. Now let's set that aside to dry and go back to our lid. Using my Fix All glue, and I get this at the Dollar Tree, and we're just going to use this to glue our knob right onto the lid. So I just put a little bit of that glue on the back side of that knob, and I set that in the center of the lid. Now this does take about an hour to dry and 24 hours to cure. So I wouldn't be pulling on it for a little bit, but it does look great once everything is done and is very functional. And here is what our adorable little tin turned out like. I just love this upcycling project. This is a perfect little project to just give you a little bit of fall and recycling something old into something new again. And if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like button below. And if you want to be notified whenever I'm posting new videos, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Thanks! We're going to start this inspiration today using 4 Dollar Tree 5x7 canvases. And for our first step is just removing the canvas from the frame. And to do this, I'm just using some pliers and a screwdriver, and I'm just going to remove the staples from the back. Now with the magic of video, we'll go ahead and speed this up, and you can see that we've taken off our canvas and we have 4 blank frames ready to go. Next, I'm going to take my Waverly Antique Wax and stain all of these frames. And if you haven't done this before, I just use a baby wipe and wipe them down and then let them dry. Next, we're going to take some wood glue and a little bit of hot glue, and we're going to go ahead and make what looks like a window panel. So we're just going to attach these together, and I'm using my pink clips that I got from the Dollar Tree. You could use some clamps or simply just hold them together long enough for the hot glue to set, and then set this down on a flat surface to dry. Next, we repeat the same steps on the other 2 frames and let them dry as well. Once those are completely dry, we're going to go ahead and attach the 2 pieces together using the same method with the wood glue and the hot glue. Now here's what your frame will look like when that is completely dry. Now let's go ahead and do all of our embellishments to this fun window. I'm going to start out with this wood truck that I got at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to tape it down to a paintable surface. By taping this down, it's not going to move on you when you're trying to paint. It also is great for you to be able to kind of lift that piece of cardboard up so that you can get those outside edges really easily without getting your fingers all messy. So it's one of my tricks that I like to do. So we're starting out with Apple Barrel Tuscan Teal, and next I'm going to use my Terracotta Black for the wheels. And I used the terracotta black because it had a little bit of a texture to it, and I thought that kind of fit in with what the truck wheels would be like. For the wood feature on our truck, I'm just going to use Waverly chalk paint in the color Truffle. And for the bumpers on our truck, I'm going to use Waverly chalk paint in the color Elephant. I'm also going to use this elephant color to just give some highlights to the truck, to kind of give it some dirt and rust look on our truck. And for our final color on this truck, I'm using Waverly chalk paint in the color Sandstone, and we're just going to do a little bit of highlights on that wood part of the truck. Once our truck has dried, I am grabbing out the stencil that I got last year on Amazon, and it is still available, so I'll put a link for it in my description box below. And we're just going to use the Happy Harvest portion of the stencil, so we're not going to use the pumpkin or the leaf. So I'm just going to center that underneath the window of the truck, and using my chalk paste by Redesign, and it's this vintage lace. It's like a light off-white white, and we're just going to go ahead and squeegee that over the top of our stencil, and then we'll remove this stencil. Now this fall set of stencils that I came with 6 different stencils, and I have used them on multiple projects for the last 2 years. So I think it was a really good investment for $6.99. A little over $1 a stencil, but I keep reusing these over and over again. They wash up great. So back to our cute little truck. I think this stencil turned out great on this truck. I'm going to set this aside to dry. At Dollar Tree this year, this is a new item that I've found, and it's this fun garland that has pumpkins on the garland. And so I am going to actually take these pumpkins off the garland, and they're just hot glued together. And when you take them off, you'll have 6 little pumpkins. And I really like these metal pumpkins, and we're going to put 3 of them in the back of our truck. Next, we'll save those beads. I'll leave them on the strand so they're easier to store. Now let's go grab our little truck and 3 of these pumpkins. To attach these pumpkins, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue them onto the back side of this truck. And I'm just using some hot glue to do this. But I am going to have the pumpkin kind of stick up a little bit higher than the bottom there, just so they kind of poke out of the truck. And for the 3rd pumpkin, I'm just going to stick that kind of on the top, like a little pyramid coming out of the truck. Be really careful. I was putting the hot glue directly on the back side and then putting down my pumpkins, but you can notice that I'm not holding on to it for very long because that metal does get hot with the hot glue. So while that is drying, I am going to make up all the rest of the embellishments that we're going to use for our window frame, and then I'm going to show you how to put this all together. So I'm starting out with a pick that I got from the Dollar Tree, and this is just one pick, and I'm taking it apart. Next, we'll go ahead and gather up 3 of the pieces and make a mini bouquet and take some floral tape to attach it. Now that those bouquets are finished, we'll set those aside and we'll start working on our farmhouse bow. For our first step on this bow is we're taking some wired ribbon and I'm just going to make the shape of a bow. Once I've done that, I'm going to add an additional loop on either side until I have 3 loops on either side of my bow. Next, I'll just go ahead and cut the ribbon from the spool, and we're just going to continue to hold that ribbon in the center, and we're squishing that together, and then you add a little pipe cleaner and twist that around as tight as you can, and this keeps the shape of the bow all nice and pretty. Now, once you have that pipe cleaner attached, I'm going to take a small piece of the same ribbon and I'm going to fold it into thirds. And what we'll do is we're going to wrap that around the piece of pipe cleaner to cover that up and finish our bow. And to attach, I'll use some hot glue on the back side of the bow. Now, all you have to do is fluff out your bow and decide how you want your tails to look on the edges of your bow. Now the fun part, let's put all of these things together. So I'm going to take this adorable truck and we're going to take hot glue and a little bit of wood glue and we're going to add that to the center bar of this window. So I'm starting out with the wood glue because that takes a lot longer to dry. And then quickly I'll use my hot glue and add a stripe of that onto our little row and then place down that truck. And the hot glue just helps that truck adhere to the wood quicker, and then that wood glue will take a little bit longer to dry. And once your truck is in place, we'll go ahead and grab those little bouquets that we made. And we're going to take those bouquets and we're going to line that on the bottom row of this window. And I'm using 2 zip ties to go ahead and attach those bouquets. And I wanted the window to be able to sit flush against a wall when I hung it. So I used the zip ties and I closed them at the front of the bouquets. And to cover up those zip ties, I took a piece of raffia and I just tied it in a simple knot. And we're going to hot glue that to the front. And I thought that we might need a little bit more at the bottom of this window. So what I did is I had another pick that I had gotten from the Dollar Tree. And this one had a mini pumpkin on it as well. And we're just going to attach that right to the center just to kind of make it more of our centerpiece on the bottom. And for the top of our window, we are going to add our bow that we made. And I'm just using hot glue to attach the bow. Now I flip this over and I'm going to add a quick little hanger. I'm using some jute and I made a little loop. And using hot glue, I'm just going to attach that to our frame. Now let's go ahead and flip this frame over and check out our adorable truck. And I just love how this piece turns out. This just screams fall to me. The truck, the pumpkins, the wood, the farmhouse feel it has. This may be one of my favorite fall decor pieces. I would love to know what you think. Please feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what your favorite is today. Let's make some mini pumpkins. I recently discovered Woodpecker Crafts and I am in love with these little spindles that they have. And they come in a 10-pack and I'll leave a link in my description box below. These things are amazing. And I'm going to take one of these spindles and I'm going to use these cutters. And these cutters are from the garden center at the Dollar Tree and they work really well to cut different things. So we're going to make 2 cute little stems that look a little bit different because of the way that the knob is in the middle of that spindle. Now I grabbed my zip sander just to sand off any little rough edges that there might be from my cut. Next, I'm going to grab these wood cubes that I found at the Dollar Tree, and these are adorable. So if you see them at the Dollar Tree, grab them. You can do so many fun things with them. But for this project, we're going to make pumpkins. So I'm taking a drill and a 1/4-inch drill bit, and I'm just going to drill a little hole in the center of our cube. And these cubes are hollow, so they're very easy to drill. But if you're nervous about drilling these, I do have a second way of making these later on in the video to show you. Now, with that hole drilled, I want to do a fit check just to make sure that that spindle fits nicely into that hole, and it does fit perfectly. So we are all ready to start doing our decorating for these pumpkins. So one of the cubes, I'm going to go ahead and stain with my Waverly Antique Wax. And for my second cube, I'm going to take my Delta White metallic paint, and I'm going to paint that white. Now for the third cube, this is the cube that I didn't put a hole in. We're going to just stain that with the Waverly Antique Wax. Once that's completely stained, I'm going to whitewash it a little bit with the Waverly Plaster Paint. Now that we have our 3 blocks or pumpkins ready to go, let's go ahead and work on our stems. We have the spindle that we cut in half earlier, and this little peg here I got from the Dollar Tree in the Crafter Square section. These are so fun. So I'm going to go ahead and stain a few of these pegs using my antique wax. And then for the last little peg, I am going to use my Satin Finish Black Multi-Surface Paint. And I changed my mind with the peg from the Dollar Tree, and I went ahead and I covered up that antique wax with my Waverly Truffle Paint. No, I couldn't just leave the last one alone, so I took my Waverly Chalk Paint in the color Plaster, and I whitewashed the spindle that was done with the antique wax. And now here is all 3 of our stems ready to go. Let's put these little pumpkins together. For our first pumpkin here, we're going to take some wood glue and a little bit of hot glue, and this is how we're going to attach the stem since we did not drill a hole for this one. And now once our stem is attached, all I'm going to do is take a little bit of hot glue, and I'm adding a little raffia bow to accessorize. Now for our next little pumpkin, I'm using the white metallic pumpkin, and I'm taking a little bit of hot glue and just adding that to the top of the hole. And then we're just going to insert that spindle in, and it fits really tight in there. You might not even need to use the hot glue, but I just wanted to be sure. After that, I'd do a little bit more hot glue and add a small black bow, and this pumpkin is complete. It's very chic and fun. And for our farmhouse pumpkin here, we're just going to add a little bit of hot glue, add that spindle, and then there is a cute little bow that we put on the top there that's white and black, and a little twine bow as well, just to give it a little bit more dimension. And now our third little pumpkin is complete, and here is all of our pumpkins all done up. I think these turned out fabulous. I start this craft with one of the foam pumpkins from the Dollar Tree and some yarn that we got at the Dollar Tree. And I'm measuring the yarn out in 18-inch strips. And once we have our first strip of yarn cut, I'm going to go ahead and measure out 11 additional pieces. So we need a total of 12 18-inch pieces of yarn. Once we have everything together, I'll just tie those pieces together with a knot. And for our next step, we're going to tape the yarn down to the table. And I'm taking 4 strands of each into 3 different bunches. And we're going to do a basic braid, and we'll braid that all the way down to the bottom. And once we get the braid complete, we'll just finish with a knot. This is one of my favorite pumpkins to make in the fall. It's fun because you get to make a whole bunch of little braids. I usually make 34 to 35 braids per pumpkin, and it's something you can do while you're just watching TV for a little bit and you just need something to do while you're relaxing that doesn't take much effort at all. And now that our braids are complete, let's move on to the next step. I'm taking a wine cork and some ribbon that I have from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to wrap the ribbon around the wine cork. And every few wraps, I'll use a little bit of hot glue just to make sure everything stays into place. And I really like this ribbon from the Dollar Tree. It has like just a little circle that you can cut out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut one of the little circles out, and I just hot glue that right on the top of the wine cork. And this is going to be the stem for our pumpkin. And I just think it adds a lot of character and makes it look so pretty. Now, if you don't want to wrap it with fabric, you could also paint the cork or just leave the cork the way it is. So the Dollar Tree carries a bunch of these different types of foam pumpkins. You might see them in white, black, or orange. And I'm just going to cut a circle out of the top and of the bottom of this foam pumpkin. Now here comes the fun part, putting the pumpkin together. We're going to take all of those braids that you made and we're going to stuff them in the pumpkin on the top and on the bottom. You're welcome to hot glue them if you'd like, but as you can see, once you start putting a bunch of these braids into this pumpkin, it stays in pretty secure. So you don't have to hot glue if you don't want to. When you get to the last few braids, sometimes you need to push the other braids that are around the pumpkin out just so that you can make sure to fit all of the braids in. And the tighter you get them in there, the better. And once you're all done, your pumpkin's gonna look like this. Now I'm gonna take my wine cork and insert it into the top part of this pumpkin. Off camera, I made a cute messy bow. And if you haven't made a messy bow before, you're just basically layering 2, 3, 4 pieces of ribbon and you tie them in the center. And I wanted to add a little bit more detail, so I added a raffia bow right to the center of the messy bow, and I'm just gonna hot glue that. And it didn't quite stick the first time, so I did have to add a little bit more hot glue, and I used my makeup applicator this time to really press that bow in. And now our pumpkin is complete. I love how this one turned out. And I can't wait to make a whole bunch more for the fall season. This next craft is simple, but maybe one of my favorite crafts I've made in a while. So we're starting out with this frame that I got at the Dollar Tree, a small wood coaster, a rub-on transfer, and sunflower tissue paper. Now, starting with the cute little coaster here, I'm just putting this on my board and I'm going to cut a 1/2 inch off of each side. I do not want the rounded edges, so I'm just going to draw a line using my pencil, and then using a razor blade, I go over the line that I drew. And I only had to go over this twice, and it was able to just cut through enough that I could just snap off the piece. And once I have done this on both sides of my coaster, I did take my zip sander, or you could use a sanding block, and we're just going to sand down the edges to make sure everything is nice and smooth. Now that we have a beautiful rectangle piece of wood here, I'm going to tape that down to a paintable surface, and I do want to do a faded coat of plaster paint on this. And to get that look, I am going to go ahead and just lightly dry brush over the top of this board. And once I have done a little bit of dry brushing with my paint, I take this adorable little squirt bottle of water and I'm just going to spray a few squirts on here, and this will thin out the paint so it gives it a really nice faded look. Now, once our paint has dried, I did grab my Mod Podge in matte, and I'm just going to paint a nice coat of Mod Podge over the top of our board. And once that Mod Podge has completely dried, I lay a piece of our tissue paper over the top of our board. And I just center those sunflowers the way that I would like them. And once I have the position that I would like, I am going to grab a piece of parchment paper, and using the iron-on method, I'm just going to iron this tissue paper right onto the board. What this does, if you haven't done this in the past, is the Mod Podge warms up from the hot iron and then just allows for your tissue paper to adhere seamlessly to your board. And when you're ironing it like this, you have no wrinkles. It looks flawless. So if you haven't tried this yet, I would definitely give this technique a try. And now to remove that excess tissue paper, I am using my zip sander, but you can use a sanding block as well. And I'm just going to sand in a downward motion to remove the tissue paper. I place this back down on my paintable surface, and using my Mod Podge, I am going to seal this in. Now, for me, I have found that if I use less Mod Podge for sealing, it works better and there's less of a chance of any sort of bubbling or anything like that. But if you don't want to seal it with Mod Podge because you've had issues in the past, you may want to try a spray sealer. Those seem to also do well when covering up different papers when you're using Mod Podge to seal everything in. And now that our Mod Podge is dry, I am going to grab my rub-on transfer. And I want to say a quick thank you to Robin at Crafts Unleashed. She sent me this over in a bundle of some fun craft supplies. And so thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate you sending this over. And if you haven't checked out her channel, I'll leave a link for her down below. Please go check her out and see what she's creating. She makes some fun things on her channel. Now, I love these rub-on transfers because they're just so easy to use. You just stick them where you would like to place them, use your popsicle stick, and you just rub until the image is transferred over to your piece. And now remove that transfer piece over the top, and your image is there on your piece. If for some reason you don't get it right the first time, you can just place that piece back down and just try transferring it again. This one went beautifully, and I did not have to do that. It just was seamless going onto my piece. Now I'm just going to place this back on my paintable surface, and using a very, very light coat of Mod Podge, I'm just going to go over the top of my transfer just to seal everything in. Now let's go ahead and put this together. I am going to go ahead and just hot glue this little saying right onto this fun frame. And this frame I did get at the Dollar Tree. It had a clip on there where you see that hole, but I broke that off on accident before, so hey, now I have the perfect piece to use for my craft. So now that we have our hot glue down, I am going to place that sign right over the top and cover that hole. And you could leave this just the way it is, but I did decide that I needed a little bit more, so I did add a little raffia bow to the top just to go with the fall season. And wow, I love how this little sign turns out. This is such a fun piece for the fall. I like that it's cheerful and happy, but also gives you that fall feelings. And yeah, I'm grateful, thankful, and blessed for this little piece. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit that subscribe or like button below. It really helps my channel grow. I appreciate it. Thanks. For this craft, I'm starting with this sign that I got at the Dollar Tree, and we're going to remove the nautical piece on the front. And I'm just going to scrape that off and sand that down with my zip sander. Now we have a great blank slate to start our craft. I'm going to start out by using my Waverly Antique Wax, and we're going to stain the wood on the front side of this sign. And if you haven't done this before, you just paint the front using the wax, and then once you have painted the front, you just wipe it down with a paper towel or a baby wipe. Now I'm going to grab my Waverly paint in the color Plaster, and I'm going to whitewash over the top of the stain. Now for this next step, I'm going to use 10 of these wood biscuits, and I did get these on Amazon, but you can get them at Home Depot or Lowe's, and they're a size 0, and I'm just going to paint them with my yellow chalk paint from Waverly. And when I started painting them, they started moving all over the piece of cardboard, so I took a piece of painter's tape and I just laid that down, and I'm just going to place those little biscuits on top of the painter's tape, which will make it so easy to paint these. And we're not going to be painting the back side of these, so just worry about getting the front side and around the outside corners, because you'll still see those a little bit. I'm curious if any of you have used these wood biscuits in your crafts. If you have, leave me a comment below and let me know how you guys have used them. While these are drying, I'm grabbing another paintable surface and I added a little piece of tape, and this is just a small circle round that I got in a package from Amazon. And I'm going to paint this brown with burnt umber paint from Apple Barrel, and this will be the center of our sunflower. Next, I'm going to take some of that same burnt barrel paint and I'm going to just dry brush around the edges of our little petals. Now I'm going to set this all up ahead of time before I glue anything down, because I want to make sure I get the flower just right onto this surface. So you can see me here just laying all the pieces around, and it does take a little bit to get them where you want them to be. And once you're happy with your flower, I'm taking some wood glue, and this glue I did get at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to do a few petals at a time. And I'm just going to put the glue down and then place the petals back to where I want them onto the surface. And you might notice there that I'm using a little bit of hot glue after I've put the wood glue on, just to help them stick quicker so that way the wood glue has time to set. And once you have everything glued into place, you'll have this beautiful sunflower sign that's all ready to hang. We're starting today's project out with a board from the hardware store and our Waverly Antique Wax. And I am going to go ahead and stain both sides of this board using our antique wax. I thought I was going to use regular stain, but the antique wax worked amazing, and I really liked the color it brought to the board. And as you've probably guessed, we are making a leaner for our front door. And I really wanted to replace the fall one that I had previously. So I'm using these letters from Walmart, and I'm just going to place them down on a paintable surface. And using some painter's tape, I'm going to actually tape these down. And I found by taping these down, it does make it a little bit easier for me to actually get around the edges of the letter without getting my fingers all sticky with paint. So on these letters, I'm going to do a different painting technique that I haven't done before on my videos. For our first step, we are going to go ahead and paint a single coat over the top of the letter and on the sides. And I'm using multi-surface folk art paint, and this one is vintage white and it's a satin finish. And we're just going to do a really nice coat over everything. And you can see here by having this taped down, it's really easy to get the edges around the letters. Now, while that first coat of paint is drying, I grabbed these shelf liners from the Dollar Tree. And this is just like that rubbery shelf liner that you can find. And I'm going to cut a piece that will fit over the top of our letter. Once I have that laid over the top of our letter, I did grab some painter's tape and I just put a little bit down on either side just to make sure nothing moved around while we were painting. We're going to use the same paint we used earlier, and we're going to paint over the top of the shelf liner on top of the letter. And for this step, I do a thick coat of paint over the top of the letter. Now, while the paint is still wet, we're going to go ahead and remove that shelf liner from our letter. Now here you can see we have a really nice texture of paint over the top of this letter. Let's repeat this same step on the rest of our letters. I did use the same piece of shelf liner for all of the letters. All I did was wash the shelf liner or rinse it off under some water and let it dry for a minute before I reused it. And now that all of our letters have been painted and textured, I'm going to go ahead and grab out this plaid stencil that I've been using a lot in some of my crafts. And I did get this stencil on Amazon, so I'll put a link for it in my description box below. But I'm just going to lay this over the top of my letter. Now for our next layer, I am going to be using this real brown multi-surface satin paint from Folk Art. And this works out really nice. I'm just adding a little bit to my bowl, and then I'm going to brush this over the top of my stencil. Now with the texture underneath it and different things, I wasn't too worried about a little bit of bleeding because I wanted to make sure this kind of had a cozy and like flannel feel to it. And once we're done applying all of our paint, we're going to remove that while everything is still wet. And then I did go and I rinsed off my stencil so that I could reuse it on my next letter. We're going to keep repeating this step until all of our letters are the same. While these are all drying, I am going to grab this pumpkin that I got from the dollar store. And you've probably seen these around. They've had them for a lot of years. For our first step here, we're going to remove the hanger and the bow from this pumpkin. And I have found that using a heat tool or a hot blow dryer will help soften up that hot glue on your project, making it easier to remove. And now that I have our piece taped down to a paintable surface, I'm going to be using my multi-surface satin paint in the color Pueblo, and we're just going to give a nice coat of paint over the whole entire pumpkin. And I did do 2 coats of paint for this pumpkin. After I painted the pumpkin, I forgot to paint the stem, so I did come back with my real brown paint and painted the stem. And to give a little bit of dimension to our pumpkin, I did use the vintage white, and we'll just go ahead and dry brush really lightly around our pumpkin. Now, while that pumpkin is drying, I grabbed this Hello wood cutout from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to tape that down to a paintable surface. And you guessed it, we are going to paint this as well. I am going to be going ahead and using that real brown paint again just to keep with our theme. And I did do 3 coats of paint over the top of this hello. Now that we have our pieces made for our pumpkin, off camera I did make a cute little bow. We are going to hot glue and use some wood glue to put this hello onto our pumpkin. And I like using this combination of glue because the wood glue takes a little bit longer to dry and sticks really well to other pieces of wood. But the hot glue gives it that immediate hold, which gives it time to cure for the wood glue. Now, once we have that hello centered on our pumpkin, I do use my paint clips to clamp that down, and I do let this cure for about an hour. Now let's go ahead and remove our clips and add our bow. When I made this bow, I did use a pipe cleaner, so I left the little pieces of pipe cleaner on the end so it'd be easier for me to feed through that hole on the top of the pumpkin, and then I just wrapped that up and around the top of the pumpkin. And now that our pumpkin is complete, let's put everything together on our board. For this step, I laid everything out on my board and I just kind of eyeballed where I wanted everything. And then I went back in with my straight edge and I made sure to space everything out. And I did a spacing of about 1.5 inches. And to attach everything onto the board, I'm using my wood glue and a little bit of hot glue. And one thing you'll notice is that I do leave my straight edge on the board as I'm putting the pieces down underneath where I'm going to put the next item. So this helps me align where I'm going to put everything so I don't have to remember when I pull everything off to put the glue on. And once we have all of our letters attached to our board, I did let this sit for about an hour, hour and a half to let the glue just cure together before I lean this up against the wall. Now here is what our leaner looks like all put together. I cannot wait to display this for the fall outside my front door. This is just adorable. And we have the back side available for us to do a Christmas or Thanksgiving sign or Halloween sign if you'd like. To start this craft, we're going to use a wood sign from the Dollar Tree, and we're going to paint this with some Waverly chalk paint in the color white. And I'm doing a light coat over the top of this sign. It doesn't need to be perfect. I want it to be a little bit more rustic, but I do want to get most of the wood covered with the white paint. And once the paint has dried, I'm going to grab some Mod Podge, and I'm just going to paint that Mod Podge on the top of these wood strips in the front of the sign. Then we're going to set this aside to dry. Next, I'm going to grab some tissue paper. I was hoping to use the gold tissue paper, but that didn't work out. So we're going with the white tissue paper, and I'm using a brown, like a chocolate colored brown ink, and I'm going to spell out the words, "Oh Autumn, please do not leave me." I'm going to cut the words out in strips in that tissue paper, and it's okay if the tissue paper is slightly bigger than the strip of wood on the sign, because we can always sand that down here after we attach everything. So I'm going to lay that down nice and neat, and then we're going to add a piece of parchment paper over the top of the tissue paper, and we're going to use our hot iron and just iron that tissue paper right onto the sign. And then we'll lift that piece of parchment paper off, and then we're going to repeat for the remaining words in the sign. These 3 rows of words, I did do all of them at the same time underneath that piece of parchment paper, and it worked just fine. So I grabbed my zip sander, and I'm just going to quickly sand any of the extra tissue paper that was extra on top of the sign, and it comes off really simple. So don't be afraid to do this. It actually works out really well. And these zip sanders work great in getting in between all of those pieces of wood. If you're interested in what the zip sander looks like, you can go ahead and look in the description box below, and there's a link to the Amazon site, so if you wanted to check what those look like. Now, for this next step here, I'm just taking some Mod Podge and I'm going over the top of the tissue paper to seal everything in. And once everything is sealed in and dry, I put a little bit of the truffle paint on a paper towel there, and I'm just going to dry brush over the top of all of the words, just a little bit of paint. And I got a little extra paint on there that I didn't want, so I used a baby wipe and just kind of wiped or smeared that around in there, and it gave it a really nice look, and I liked how that turned out. It was very rustic. So now I'm just going to set this aside for a little bit, and we're going to paint one of these wood ornaments from the Dollar Tree, and this is a maple leaf. To paint this leaf, I'm going to use my Waverly chalk paint in the color moss. And I'm doing a nice thick coat over the whole entire top layer. And once that dries, I did do a second coat just to make sure it was the color I wanted. And then I'm going to take a dry brush and I'm going to do a tiny bit of dry brushing with the truffle paint as well. And this just gives it a dirtier, rustic look. In keeping with the rustic look, I grab a raffia bow and I'm going to just go ahead and do a little bit of dry brushing on that bow as well, just to age the bow a little. Now I'm going to put my sign together. So I'm going to take my leaf and I'm going to position it onto the sign here. And I'm going to grab a pencil real quick and I'm going to mark underneath the leaf where I want the hot glue, just because sometimes I get the hot glue in the wrong spot. So I want to make sure I put it in the right spot so we don't see any of that hot glue. And once that's glued down, I'm going to glue down that little bow to cover up the hole in the ornament there. I'm really happy with how this craft turned out. It's very rustic, and I can't wait to hang this with my new fall decor. So I walked by this adorable hedgehog at the Dollar Tree, and I just loved it. However, I went through the whole entire box, and I couldn't find one that didn't have some sort of defect to it. So I found the best looking one, and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to paint this over again and make it my own so that I have a really cute hedgehog for the fall season. And since this hedgehog is made out of a hard plastic, I am going to use my Paint for Plastic by Folk Art to do the painting for him. And I will link these Paint for Plastic paints in my description box below, just in case you're interested in them. So now time to paint this little hedgehog. I start out by just painting everything on the back side of him with the dark brown paint. And this is just, it's such an easy thing to do, but you can already tell how much different it looks once you're done painting him. And I found these cute hedgehogs the other day at, I believe it was Home Goods, and they were like $14.99 a piece. So giving this little $1.25 hedgehog a facelift will save you some money, but give you that decor piece that is in style for this season. Now for the fur on the front side of this hedgehog, I am going to take my cream color Paint for Plastic with a little bit of the brown, and I just mix that up until I get a color that I like. And then I'm just going to paint everything on the front side of this hedgehog. And now for some of the finishing touches on our hedgehog. I'm using the color Iced Tea for the pumpkin here. At first I thought about making the pumpkin like a light blue or turquoise to go better with my tray, but I really like the idea of the orange pumpkin, so I stuck with that. But you can do whatever you guys would like to do for your hedgehog and make it match your decor. And after I painted the eyes and the mouth again with the black colored paint, I just went back in and I needed to get the top of the pumpkin. So I did have a green paint for here, but it was really green. So I did add a lot of brown to that just to kind of tone it down to make it look more like a pumpkin stem. Now here is our finished little hedgehog. I think he turned out amazing. And I'm going to do a little bit of a before and after here. So here is our before picture. And here is our after picture. I just love how this hedgehog turned out. He totally stole my heart, and I cannot wait to display him as my masterpiece on this tiered tray, because he definitely is my favorite of the day.